Look at this. You're looking at the bracket right now. Penn State's playing SMU, the last team in, number 11 seed, and then Boise State in the quarterfinal. Is that a pretty easy path to the semifinal? And then the same thing you got to say about Texas, right? They get Clemson. Clemson sneaks in as the number 12 seed, because they were the lowest ranked of the top 5 conference champions. Then they get Arizona State in the quarters. Is that also an easier path to the semifinals? You know, I think you'd probably have a lot of people arguing that that is the case, and I don't know how we feel about that, right? 5 and 6 getting rewarded that much. That's to your point earlier.
Yeah.
Is that an easier path than what Oregon, as the number 1 overall seed, has? Because they're going to play the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee. Ohio State played them better than anybody.
Yeah, it's this interesting question about like how valuable is a bye. Like, would you rather have the extra time and not play that extra game versus having 2 games where you would be favored by touchdown or more, right? Like, I know we do this.
And one at home, right? So it's the risk of injury in the bye versus a home game and then an easier second round opponent.
Right, because if I'm looking at it like the risk of injury, it's I think it's hard to quantify what that is, but if you're telling me that, and I know Vegas has been wrong on a lot of these things, that's why we don't do the hypotheticals, but if you set out a scenario where I knew that I was going to be a touchdown favorite in my first round game, and then even potentially a 2 touchdown favorite in my second round game, I would rather take that than being Oregon sitting back and saying, I got Tennessee or Ohio State. Those are dangerous teams.
So you'd rather play the extra game?
I would rather, in that scenario, I'd rather play the extra game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a really interesting question because it gets at some of like the larger issues that I think we're trying to learn from the first year of the 12-team playoff, right? I think, you know, what the committee is clearly doing is trying to incentivize conference championship games still. Because if you put Alabama in over a team like SMU that played and lost a 3-point game to a team that made the bracket, I think what you're doing is saying no one's ever going to want to play in these games again, and we're going to have to get rid of them. And they're baked into everyone's contracts. Again, the attendance, the tickets, the media rights value, all of that is part of it. So I think that's what you're trying to preserve. You're trying to say, hey, we can do a 12-team playoff with conference championship games, and we don't penalize teams that lose them too bad.
Right.
And it helps teams, right? Because it gives them that automatic spot in the playoff. And then again, in the top 4, you get a bye as well. So you're trying to keep that status quo, I think, is one of the messages I got.
And I'm totally here for that. And we've talked about this where people are like, oh, how much are the conference championships going to matter? The way those players were playing this weekend, they weren't hearing any of that nonsense about the games might not matter moving forward. Those guys all wanted to win it. And as somebody who's played the game, I love champions. I love championship celebrations. Bring me all the confetti, pull up the white ropes, just me and my brothers and my coaches out there. That's what I'm in this game for. But you can also, I think, get to a point where we say you have a guaranteed ticket to the playoff if you win your conference title game. We're not going to guarantee that you get a bye. We're just going to rank them 1 through 12 at that point. And it gives more balance to the bracket. I think people would be a lot more comfortable with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll continue to cover that in the offseason, I'm sure, because I think there's a lot of things that people would change. As we look at the bracket, though, and we were talking about this, about Penn State and Texas, what their paths look like. Look at some of the top teams, at what Oregon and what Georgia face. Who's got the easiest path maybe to the championship game? Not saying they're going to win it, not saying they're going to get there, but who do you think has the easiest path?
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's path seems like it's fairly clear. The question is about the quarterback health, right? Is Carson Beck going to be able to roll? And if not, do you feel comfortable with your quarterback room at that point? It's really hard for me not to look at Penn State with SMU, and we'll get into the game breakdown there. I do think there are some spots of that game that favor SMU, but Penn State's certainly the more talented team. Then you would get Boise State, certainly a more talented team. We know Boise State is dangerous. We respect them. Penn State should win that game. And now you're potentially looking at an Indiana team, which could be an interesting matchup. Notre Dame, I think, could give them problems. Georgia with the banged-up quarterback, that's what you get in the semifinal? Like, it feels like there is a path carved out for Penn State based off of where they're at.
I think especially with the way that they played in the Big Ten championship game, right? Like, that was the best we've seen of Drew Aller.
Sure.
There were a lot of playmakers.
They were pushing the line of scrimmage in that game against Oregon. No doubt.
Like, there was a lot that we hadn't necessarily seen all the time this season. I think I'm with you. I think it sets up really nicely for Georgia just because you look at some of the teams that we still have questions, right? Like, can Notre Dame come back in a game if they need to throw the ball?
Right.
Indiana, they lost the game against the most talented team that they've played this year. So, like, we have some questions about that for a potential quarterfinal matchup. And then, like you said, Boise State getting the 3 seed is huge because now that would be your potential semifinal opponent as well. Oregon, I get that it is a challenge, right? I get that that is one where people are going to say, like, they did not get rewarded for getting the #1 overall seed. And the question then becomes, what system is in place where you don't want to be the #1 overall seed? That's not a good system. If you're always going to get a hot team that's like in the 8-9 range, don't love that. But I still like their path too.
Sure.
I mean, again, it's Ohio State team that they beat.
Right.
I know it was close.
Right.
But Oregon's been the most consistent and good team the entirety of the season. Tennessee's got issues offensively.
They do.
So I still like that matchup. It's also going to be at the Rose Bowl, right? Because you're also getting a little protection in terms of travel and locations. But I also think you got to feel good about Texas, right? For the same reasons as Penn State, because you get through Clemson, the weakest of the conference champions. Arizona State got real hot late, but again, they've been way down in the way that we've talked about a lot of these teams. And then you wouldn't get, Oregon until the semifinals.
Right. No, I'm there with you. Like, you're looking at Texas and their path. Like, certainly Clemson is one where the talent is equated in a game like that, but they haven't always played up to their talent. If you're Texas, you feel like you can win that one. And then to your point, now you're looking at rosters again for Arizona State. The Oregon thing, just to circle back, the reason I think we like that path is because we like Oregon as a football team. We like the way they're constructed. We like their head coach a ton. We like the way that they've played all year long. That's why they're #1, and I don't think they care what the bracket looks like, to be perfectly clear. This is just us in the media talking about it. And so, do I like Oregon's path? I like Oregon, so of course I like their path.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way to put it as well, right? I mean, and again, they were the obvious #1 overall seed. They went unbeaten this year. We've talked so much about how, hey, maybe there's increased parity this season, the transfer portal, NIL.
Not for
maybe
them.
even Nick Saban's retirement, right? Like, but then they go and win all of their games, and so maybe there is a great team. Maybe by the time we get to the finish line here, we do find out that there was one great team in college football this year and a bunch of good teams that had their ups and downs.
Right.
We'll see. I mean, Oregon would certainly earn it. That's one thing that I think really jumps out when you look at the bracket, how many games against good teams you have to win a national championship now.